Back in 2018, players worldwide got their first glimpse into what could have been when the Space World 1997 demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver was leaked to the public. In the next 2 years, more and more beta versions of Pokemon Gold and Silver would slowly be released online. One historian by the name of Aaron George is now taking those leaks and telling a story behind their development with the Cryptodex Project. I'm here today interviewing Aaron George. Aaron, if you would like to introduce yourself and just talk about a little bit of what you do first, if I may ask.
Hi, my name is Aaron George. I'm actually in my day job a PhD in American history, but as a hobby, I also run the Cryptodex, which is where I delve into a lot of Pokemon Gold and Silver development notes and development pieces that we got out of multiple leaks, and I'm trying to make sense of them, and I'm trying to give a sense of the development history that we can put together from those things.
And you mentioned on the Cryptodex, like you were heavily influenced by the likes of the work of like Helix Chamber and many others.
Yeah.
If you can if you can briefly touch upon those as how they've influenced the work you're actually doing right now for Gold and Silver.
Yeah, so Helix Chamber is absolutely wonderful. It was a group of hobbyists who were looking through the kind of internal files, the interviews that we have with the first developers of Pokemon Red and Green. And they eventually were able to get their hands on the source code of Pokemon Red and Green. And from that, we got some really interesting glimpses into what those games looked like before their final. And Pokemon in particular feels like a very black box. It feels like we knew very, very little about what Pokemon looked like before the final project. So to even get a little bit of that was fascinating. But one of the things that they noticed that I think is personally very, very brilliant is that inside the game, normally whenever you collect a Pokemon, it's listed in Pokedex order from 1 to 151. And the Pokedex order tends to be an order that loosely corresponds to when you'll first see that Pokemon. So early game ones are at the beginning, late game ones are at the end. But they noticed that there was an internal index number that didn't correspond to the Pokedex number at all. And they started doing research into that and comparing it with some of the interviews that we have from the designers. And they discovered that that internal index was an actual timeline of Pokemon's development, that the earliest created Pokemon had the lowest numbers and that the latest created ones had the latest numbers. So not only did they figure out that, but they have this series of wonderful articles that trace Pokemon's development through the internal index. They go one by one, well, not one by one, but they go through different periods of Pokemon's development using this internal index, and they can show you how different ideas evolved as you can see different Pokemon being invented. So the earliest Pokemon all look like Godzilla monsters. They all look like kaiju. Like Rhydon is the best example, kind of a generic like Godzilla-like thing that's kind of like a lizard, has like a horn on its head.
And he was the first one made, right? Like he was like the ground zero first Pokemon in the Dex, first one made out of the gate.
Yeah, and then there's one right after him named Gaiun that is literally named after Godzilla's cry, which sounds like that in Japanese.
Yeah.
And it looks basically the same as him, but without the horn and with its mouth just open really wide. That one never got all the way to the finish lines, though some people think it turned into Tyranitar in Gen 2. But anyway, you can see with those ones how they all look like Godzilla sort of monsters. You can see in the next set of them how they start coming up with the idea of typing and how they start creating different Pokemon that are just like pure versions of what a flying type or what a poison type would look like. Then after that, you can see a new set where they start coming up with the idea of evolution and they start putting them next to each other. Anyway, it's fascinating because the development of the Pokemon themselves also show you the ways that these ideas develop. So they had done great work on this. And they had done more than I think anybody else had. But then first in 2018, and then again in 2020, we got a number of leaks of internal data and early development builds of Pokemon Gold and Silver. And those came out, and there's a couple of them that are interesting. There's the Space World 97 build, the Space World 99 build, and there's also an internal backup index of Pokemon that I tend to call the Korean index. And because it was found in a Korean backup file, it doesn't actually have anything to do with the Korean version. It just was found in a backup file in the Korean localization version.
And that was from the Giga Leak, right? That was the big Nintendo.
Yeah, that was part of the Giga Leak. The Space World
was before that, but it was the same. Believe the same person who released it all anyway. So they're all together.
Yeah, exactly. I think that he pulled a ton of files off of Nintendo's internal servers and leaked a couple of them. And then as time went on, he leaked more of them. And so he was most interested in Pokemon of all things, so we started with Pokemon stuff. But I think the whole Giga Leak leads back to him, though I could be wrong. Anyway, so all of this new data comes out. We have in the Space World build, we have about 40 Pokemon no one's ever seen before, and a number of others that don't look at all what they should look like. In the Space World 99 one, we have a couple of new designs. And then in that Korean index, we have, I'm trying to remember the exact number, maybe close to 80 or 90 Pokemon designs that we've never seen before, some of which look really strange. They don't look like they're complete at all. So these all came out and people were talking about them for a while, but then everybody just stopped. And even the discussion that was there kind of felt very basic. Like I loved hearing people say, oh, I like this one's weird looking, this one's ugly. But there's only so much you can go with that. And I couldn't find people actually discussing them. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a website where I talked a lot about them so that we would have some ability to create a discussion about them. So we'd have a discourse about all those designs that we found. And maybe we can learn something more about them. And as I was looking through them, looking to figure out how we could understand them, I came up with a hypothesis that the Korean index, which is in a strange order, I came up with a hypothesis that it might be similar to that internal index numbers from the original ones, that it, in a strange, not perfect way, might also kind of date from earliest designs to latest designs. And as I went through it and as I started putting pieces together, there were about 3 or 4 Pokemon that didn't quite fit that hypothesis, but that hypothesis made everything else click into place. And I think maybe the one big contribution I've made so far is that I think when I started this, no one thought that the Korean index was chronological. And now basically everyone I talk to agrees with me that it was probably to some degree chronological.
What's the evidence from the Korean dex that actually determines it? Do they actually have a dex order within like the files from there as well that you're following?
Yeah, so what happens is in the Korean index, it has all the original Pokemon from 1 to 151 in Pokedex order, not in the old internal order.
Oh, okay.
And those sprites are sometimes they're just Pokemon Blue sprites. Pokemon Blue sprites were originally created for Gold and Silver anyway. Some of them are slightly redone. Some of them we've never seen before. But then the numbering stops, and then it restarts at 300, and it goes to I keep forgetting, I think it's like 448, something like that. So almost 150 more. That starts at 300 and goes to mid 440s. And they all have numbering. And it starts with some very, very kind of sketchy designs. There's something that looks a little bit like Kirby. There's something that looks like a smiling tree. There's
the one, if I remember correctly, you have like this giant monstrous fossil thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then like the Nazca lines, one that I believe you even say might be Celebi, but like I guess we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, yeah. But what you'll notice is if you really start delving into it, Ho-Oh appears relatively early, within the first 50 of the 150.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact that Ho-Oh appeared in an earlier build of the game that we don't have, because we have the title screen for a 1996 build of the game, and it shows Ho-Oh. It actually shows a sprite for Ho-Oh that we don't have anywhere. And so we know that Ho-Oh at least exists from before Space World 97. The other thing to notice is that I think about the last 15 Pokemon in the Korean Index are all Pokemon that appear in Space World 97 and all have the exact same sprites as Space World 97. And about 30 from before them, 29 of those 30 appear in Space World 97 and have the exact same sprites. So what it looks like is we have a lot of bizarre designs at the early stages that lead up to Ho-Oh and were probably predated Ho-Oh. And then at the very end, we have designs that were all created right before Space World 97. And so it gives a sense that there's a chronology to this. There are a couple of other reasons for this too. The Korean Index doesn't seem to be perfectly chronological. It looks like what happened is they had different designers who would make a couple pictures and then they dump them into the index all at once. And then another designer would come along and dump all of theirs in all at once.
Almost like blocks of design, right?
Yeah, so blocks. Okay. But we do seem to have blocks that look like the earliest designs Atsuko Nishida came up with. Then we have blocks of them that look like they're early ones that Sugimori came up with. And they all seem to fit into the larger chronology that we have before Space World 97. Now, it's not perfect. It could be the case that Ho-Oh being early in the list is coincidence. But given the way that the end of the list in particularly looks, the way that the end of the list mimics very closely what Space World 97 looks like, it leads me to think that there is a chronology to this.
I actually have two follow-ups to that. First, like, how do you actually know which designers design the Pokemon? Yeah. Do you actually have... I know it's very obvious, like, which ones are usually the Sugimori ones. Like, Sugimori, being the lead designer, basically had, like, probably finalized a lot of his early on, and we know on record which ones he made.
Some of them,
yeah. Same thing with, I'm trying to remember the man's name.
Morimoto?
Yeah, Shigeki Morimoto, thank you. His are also usually pretty obvious, but there were, like, 6 or 7 designers on Gold and Silver, I believe.
So there are 4 main ones for, and this is the part that I have the least expertise in. Yeah. So I might get a couple things wrong.
That's all right.
There were 4 designers on Red and Green. It started, 5-ish. It started out with Sugimori and Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, coming up with their own designs. It looks like Tajiri had his own ideas, and then Sugimori would draw them. And then they realized that they could only come up with certain types of designs. So they eventually hired Nishida and Morimoto and eventually Fujiwara as the designer. 4. And then it looks like in Gold and Silver, it looks like first when they're creating the sprites that eventually become the blue sprites and the Pokemon Yellow sprites, it looks like they hired on some people to redo those sprites, and some of those people might be working on the gold and silver sprites. It also looks like there's 2 or 3 more people who get involved in early gold and silver, and then there's, I forget his name, Saito, I think.
Mineo Saito?
Yeah, Mineo Saito. There's Yoshida. And then also Shudo, the guy who does the anime, actually came up with Lugia. When that
yes, I was going to talk about that later, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, the long and the short of it is, there's a lot of people who are way better than me at reading sprite art. There's all sorts of, what do you call it? There's all sorts of techniques to making sprite art, like anti-aliasing and dithering and stuff that I barely know what it is. But there are some people out there that are very, very good at looking at a piece of sprite art and telling who they think it was based on Sugimori or Nishida. Those are the 2 easiest. People have a harder time with Morimoto, and no one really knows what Fujiwara's are because we only have 3 confirmed designs for him.
Yeah.
So I mostly go off of what other people say about who designed what, because other people are much better at reading these sprites than me. But even so, it's a very nitpicky sort of debate, and I see people constantly whenever I say I think this person might have did it or this person might have did it. I have people arguing back and forth about, like, no, that can't be the case, this is definitely not him, or this is definitely this person, based upon very, very small, like, pieces of the sprites themselves. Saying that Sugimori's are the easiest because, and I think one thing that I've found is that when you look at the Korean index, Sugimori's designs seem to be the closest to their final sprites in the final game. Yeah. It looks like he pretty much drew them, was pretty much happy with them, and pretty much kept them there unless there was a direct need to change them. Well, it looks like Nishida's, she started with one idea and then over time they completely evolved into something else. So
there's like patterns to look for, and
there are patterns that my eyes do not see, but other people are much better at seeing.
How much of your work is like just based off of like empirical evidence, research, and things like that? Like something like the Cryptodex, when we never will, realistically, we never will have a 100% picture of like the chronological development of this. Like, you know, a lot of this is always going to be guesswork. How much of that is really baked into it? And has anybody ever, like, looking at your Cryptodex, or anybody like you've spoken to, has anybody ever like given you like alternative hypothesis or ideas on what that order could be, or are they kind of just like, yeah, this is probably what it is?
Yeah, so one person who I talk with who edits a lot of the articles on Cutting Room Floor, which is where all of this raw data can be seen. His Twitter handle is Orange French. He looks over some of my writing with me once I've finished, and he oftentimes proposes alternate explanations. He tends to be a little bit less willing to speculate than I am, so he tends to bring me down to earth a little bit. But I tend to include his alternative explanations for things whenever I can, because my job, what I'm trying to do is not just to say this is how it is. I'm trying to give a number of explanations that people can discuss and think about. Okay. But like I said, I'm a historian by trade. And one of the things that historians do is we have a whole bunch of primary sources from the past that give us an incomplete picture of what somebody was doing or what somebody was thinking about or what these historical events looked like. But we never have the full story in those cases. And part of what I like about this is that this is a very limited place where you kind of have all the research right in front of you, and you don't have all the answers, but you do have a puzzle without some of the puzzle pieces. And so it's a pastime that allows me to kind of use my expertise in history on a much more limited data set to try and see if I can figure out the connections between these things. I would say that there's a lot of guesses in what I'm trying to do with it, but I think in all sort of historical work or work on development or whatever, you're always guessing quite a bit. And what I try to do is either show as much evidence for why I think it could be this way and provide enough alternate explanations so that one explanation doesn't dominate the others, that you can look at this evidence in different ways and come to your own conclusions what you think is most likely.
Has there been any explanations that you particularly think are just super fascinating or interesting that you would like to share? Like, if there's one thing from the entire project so far that you're like, wow, that's amazing, what would it be?
Okay, I can think of 3.
Go for it. So we got time.
I'll give you those 3. The first one is Sneasel. Sneasel is a pretty well-known Pokemon from Generation 2. He's shown up a bunch in the anime. He's pretty well beloved. He's one of the rivals' signature Pokemon. But when you go all the way back to Space World 97, there's some really interesting things. First of all, Sneasel doesn't look at all how he does in the final. He looks like a cute smiling weasel. Like brown fur, like it looks like you could pet him. He looks kind of like what I call an Animal Plus design. Like Seal in Generation 1 is basically just a seal with a horn on its head. It's like a very kind of bare bones design of a regular human or a regular real world animal with one slight change to it. And that's Sneasel. It's basically a weasel. It has, its claws are slightly bigger. But, and in Space World 97, well, one thing that's interesting about it is that it shows up very early on in the Korean Index. And it shows up surrounded by a lot of other Animal Plus designs. These very basic designs that look like they were brainstorms. But it's also in Space World 97 out of order at the very, very end of the Pokédex, where it shouldn't be in that build. And it looks like they threw it in at the very last second because they needed to fill a hole, or because they had recently taken out a different design and wanted to put in something new. So Sneasel looks like it barely made it into Space World 97, but they were clearly not happy with its design. And so we have a ton of reworks of Sneasel's design. First, they changed its little cute smile into kind of an evil grin. Then they changed the angle of its claws so that it looks like it's slashing at somebody. Then they play around with taking away its tail, giving it back its tail. They turn its evil grin into like a full toothy, like evil smile. At one point, they turn into something that looks a little bit like Shadow the Hedgehog, and then they just draw over and put black spikes all over it. And then, literally like what looks to be about 2 months before the final game is released, they completely throw away the old design, have a completely different designer make it, and then we get a completely different design that we know as Sneasel. But what's interesting is that even that design doesn't look like the final that we know and love as Sneasel now. Its back sprite doesn't look like it's been fully shaded. Even in the final game, it doesn't look like it's been completely shaded. It's the wrong colors.
Yeah.
And it should have a crystal on its face, but instead it just kind of has a pink spot. And then when they released Pokemon Silver, they redid its design one more time. They fixed its coloring, they fixed the shading on its back sprite, and they made its front sprite look a little bit better with that crystal.
Wait, you mean Pokemon Crystal, not Pokemon Silver?
Yeah, Pokemon Crystal. So
okay.
like
you said Silver. I just want to make sure.
So like a year after they came out with the final Gold and Silver games, when they came out with Crystal to basically make their revised and like fully remastered version, they fixed it again. So what I find so fascinating about Sneasel is that Sneasel's a very iconic Pokemon, but it went through a million design stages before, at the very end, they just threw together a design which became the one that we know now. And like the amount of changes and work that went into it is crazy.
And you also implied like it may have also gotten cut at one point, or very close to being cut.
It looks like it barely made it into Space World 97 as a replacement for something else.
Wow.
And that's what's interesting about that. Okay, another one that's interesting. Another one that's interesting is Stantler. So Stantler is a weird Pokemon, and it was one of the Pokemon that seemed to disprove my theory that the Korean Index was chronological for a long time. What's weird about Stantler is that Stantler does not show up in Space World 97, but it does show up in the Korean Index, which was mostly created previous to Space World 97. The Korean Index is dated internally to May 1998, but it looks like almost all of it was worked on before Space World. So what's its sprite doing in the Korean Index but not in Space World 97? That was a huge mystery to me for a while. And I looked through what we had, and I realized that if you compare its moveset to a deleted Pokemon from Generation 1 that was just called Deer.
Yes.
And if you compare its early name, which to some degree you could either translate as I Deer or just Deer. And you also look at where it's placed in the Korean Index, it's pretty early on, and it's very near a couple of other Pokemon we do know were taken from Red Green's development and brought to Gold Silver. So all of those things made me realize that Stantler was very likely a rework of this Generation 1 Pokemon that didn't make it, Deer. And that was really cool to find out. And that was something we could have really only known if we were taking the Korean Index as chronological seriously.
And that's also been long speculation that a couple of the Gen 2s were from Gen 1. I know Donphan is another one that usually gets brought up in that too, right?
Donphan's really early. It shows up early in the Korean Index.
And they thought it might be the elephant from Gen 1?
Yeah, I don't think so, unfortunately, because we actually have, in slot 309 in the Korean Index, we actually have one that pretty much does look to be the Gen 1 elephant. And it doesn't look like it's all related to Donphan. So it looks like they were trying to use that Gen 1 elephant, but that it didn't make it even. Okay. It didn't make it into even Space World 97, probably because they had the Donphan design, which was a far better design. Yeah. And then one last one, and this one I think is a little bit hard to explain, but I'll do my best.
Go for it.
So in Space World 97, one of the weird things about it is that it has 1 billion baby Pokemon in it. And given that in the final, you can play the entire final game never running into a baby Pokemon. They play a very small role. It was probably terrible for gameplay to have, I think 15 baby Pokemon like the Space World 97 did. So a lot of them got cut. But one of those baby Pokemon was named Ella Baby, and it was the previous evolution of Electabuzz. Now, in the final, Ella Baby looks completely different, and it was renamed to Ella Kid. There's one piece of this that doesn't make sense, though. In the Korean Index, we have Ella Baby's design, and then right next to it, we have in a different slot, we have Ella Kid's design. And that's...
So both exist at the same time?
Both exist in the Korean Index.
Wow.
Right next to each other. And that's real weird, and it's not... And no other Pokemon in the Korean Index is like that. There are a couple of maybes, but as far as we know, none of the other ones are like that. So, and this is still controversial. I don't think we necessarily have enough evidence for this, but maybe. I think what happened is that originally, Elebaby is the very first baby Pokemon in the Korean Index by quite a far margin. Okay. And it's right next to other Pokemon that were created to be alternate evolutions to Pokemon from Gen 1. So it's right next to Crobat, for instance, which is an evolution out of Golbat that needs friendship to do so. It is right next to Politoed, that is an alternate evolution of Poliwhirl. And so it looks like at the time, Sugimori was experimenting with alternate evolutions. And Electabuzz is a perfect candidate for that, because in the original game, you can only find Electabuzzes that are at least level 30. So hypothetically, what if there was an earlier evolution to Electabuzz you never saw, because you always met him at such a high level? I don't think Elebaby was originally invented as a baby Pokemon. I think that Elebaby was originally invented as just a pre-evolution for Electabuzz, on the premise that we had never seen Electabuzz at a low enough level to ever have seen him. And I think later they liked this idea so much they came up with the entire baby idea for Pikachu and Jigglypuff and all the others. But I think originally this was just another experiment like Crobat to imagine another way that a Gen 1 Pokemon could have evolved differently that we didn't see. But on top of that, what to do with the fact that Elekid is right there next to it in the Korean Index, but Elekid doesn't appear in Space World 97. There's one explanation, which is that Elekid shows up in an anime short pretty early on. So what could have happened is, since the Korean Index technically goes all the way to May 1998, Sugimori could have decided he needed to work on that design and get it perfect before the anime so that it was finalized, so that they didn't change it later, so that it showed up in the anime and they had it set. So he could have chosen a different slot and then reworked Elebaby until he was happy with it and came up with Elekid, and then it went into the anime. Oh. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, because why is Elekid right next to Elebaby in the index? It doesn't make sense that he would have just erased the slot right after it for no reason, whatever was in it.
Is there any possibility that it could have just been like a full evolutionary line that he was tinkering?
That's what I think happened. That's what I think happened. Again, I think this is one of the findings that I have the least evidence for. But I think what was going on is Elebaby and Elekid were supposed to be forms 1 and 2 of Electabuzz. Okay. And then before Space World 97, they decided to cut one of them because, and I think the reason is because later they came up with that idea of baby Pokemon. And they realized that Elebaby could fit in as one of those baby Pokemon that they had created for Jigglypuff, for Pikachu, for all these others.
And plus, you also said like they showed him off in like that short. I think that was like the short from the second movie, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So like, and his design's kind of locked, and everyone's seen it now. And
yeah, but what's weird is it's Elebaby's design in Space World 97, not Elekid's.
Yeah.
The Elekid design But here's what I think. One of the commenters I had pointed out that Elebaby learns all sorts of moves like Thunder Punch, and the Elebaby sprite doesn't have hands. And so the commenter pointed out that maybe what had happened is they had meant to keep the Elekid sprite, but they had accidentally replaced the Elebaby. They had accidentally used the Elebaby sprite, not the Elekid sprite.
So they made a mistake.
Space World 97. But they were already moving towards just moving to Elekid itself.
Wow.
So I think that that's what's going on, and I think that that's why you have those two right next to each other. But there could be a lot of other explanations. Oh. Yeah.
Right, that's still amazing though. Just like the story alone of like, this is possibly, first off, the fact that like, going back to like Sneasel, for example, this is possibly how lucky Sneasel is just to be in the game.
Yeah.
and then becomes sort of like this pretty popular Pokemon. And I'm assuming this, like, a lot of that early design was before they even had like concepts of, you know, like what it, not just what it would look like, but also like full move sets yet, because I'm assuming they would tinker that as they go. Typing as well, and even evolution. I know, like you mentioned in your in a lot of what you write on the Cryptodex, like the happiness mechanic was not implemented early on, if that's correct.
Yeah, it looks like the happiness mechanic was originally created for Pokemon Yellow, with the Pikachu that followed you around and got happier. And then they liked it so much, it looks like it is implemented in Space World 97. But they hadn't used it for any evolutions quite yet in Space World 97. We actually have some weird evidence that Umbreon and Crobat were originally supposed to evolve with low friendship if they hated you.
Really?
But you get low friendship by making them faint constantly. And there's something very un-Pokemon about the idea that you were constantly hurting your Pokemon to make it evolve. So they eventually changed Crobat to high friendship and Umbreon to evolving during the night.
Oh, so even like the day-night evolutions were also not a thing that were added yet.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any day-night evolutions in Space World 97. We do have Pokemon that show off that they can be caught in only the day or the night in Space World 97. Hoot Hoot looks like it was created on purpose. Well, it doesn't look like it was created on purpose, but it looks like Hoot Hoot was used in Space World 97 to show off that mechanic. Okay. Because at the Space World convention, one person would get about 20 minutes to play the demo, and they'd be able to catch whatever they caught, and then the next person would get a chance. And since the convention is over the entire day, once it gets late into the night, people who are then playing it catch completely different Pokemon. And it looks like Nintendo is kind of using that as a gimmick to show off that people who came in the morning saw different things than people in the evening. Hoot Hoot was their prime example of that.
It's a good gimmick, let's be real.
It is.
But like going back to what I was saying, like all these like different like stories and whatnot, they really do paint like such a good picture. Like if there's like one takeaway from all of this that you hope that people would be reading it, you know, down the line, right now, whatever it is, like what is it that you're hoping that they would get out of all of this stories, all of this history, all of this work that you're putting into it?
I just wish people would talk more about these things and speculate a bit more about these things. I think we have such a cool insight into how these games were created and like what some of the early ideas were, that I just wish that we had a lot of people who were happy to explore that and like think about what could have been and like what they think this could have been. I started it not necessarily to give definitive answers to anything, but I wanted to show that we had enough evidence that we could make some educated guesses and to set kind of the terms of the field so that other people could talk more about them. And that's what I'm hoping would happen, that when people read it, they would be able to take what I said, agree or disagree with me, and just come up with more theories that fit the evidence I found.
Do you think that's slowly changing, like as more, like not just with the leaks being out and like showing, hey, here's like the inner workings to the public now, but we also have a lot more people really into preservation, really into like trying to chronological this history. You know, not just like groups like Cutting Room Floor or even Helix Chamber. We're talking like individuals, people on YouTube, you know, journalists, organizations like Frank Cifaldi's History Foundation. You know, one of the things I love is, because I'm, you know, like you, I'm also a trained historian, and I love like looking into like the timelines of events and things and you know, games are a hobby. Look, you know, trying to like make sense of like how did it really come into this, and that's doing it without like any tech knowledge. You know, I am terrible when it comes to like understanding coding and all that stuff, but it's always fascinating to hear this. You think like, I guess like there's a question in there somewhere, but it's like about, I guess it's like about like how that conversation is slowly changing. Because I remember, to tie it back to like Lugia for a second.
Yeah.
And like this is like I always find this story fascinating. It came from the what's his name from the anime? I think it was like oh god,
Shudo.
Thank you, Shudo. I almost said Morimoto, but I know that's not right.
Yeah.
It came from Shudo from the anime. He created specifically only to be in that movie, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, no, we got to add him to the game. And then he kind of became like a last minute addition.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't even supposed to be in Gold and Silver, let alone be one of the box mascots.
Yeah, he wasn't. What I find super interesting about that is Ho-Oh in its earliest versions was either a pure flying Pokemon or a normal flying Pokemon. But once Lugia gets added and they want to create a distinction, like they want to create like a mirror of the two of them, then Lugia becomes Psychic Flying, they say because Psychic was the most powerful type in Gen 1 and they wanted to give Lugia something that was exciting. But that means Ho-Oh had to get its own interesting typing as well, so it became Fire Flying as a result, as a direct mirror image of Lugia.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting. Stuff like that is interesting. I think what I'd say is people come to games for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of people who play Pokemon are really excited about the newest games, the newest Pokemon, and that's all they're going to be excited about. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I remember I'm the same way about unreleased takes and B-sides of like my favorite bands. Yeah. I remember I once bought my dad a box set of one of his favorite bands, Wilco, one of all their unreleased and like demo stuff, and he was like, I enjoy this, but like there's a reason why they didn't put this on the album, and I'd rather just listen to the album with the stuff that they really produced. And like that's a perfectly reasonable like response to development stuff too. A lot of people say, I don't really care about that because it's clear that those were the worst designs. Like I just want to see what they came up with that was best. So I think this is a subject that always is gonna reach a niche audience to some degree, but you're right, Frank Cifaldi does all sorts of cool stuff. Dr. Lava on YouTube and Twitter has done a lot to like get people excited about Pokemon beta designs, and because all of this information is out there, but it's not easily accessible for people who don't know where it is. Dr. Lava plays a great role in like mainstreaming it and like making people realize that this stuff is here. So I do hope that people do get excited in this. Another person to bring up is Racy Beep, who is this great artist who is very good at making watercolor designs of Pokemon, a lot like Sugimori's. And she's done a really, really good job popularizing these beta designs by making them their own kind of pseudo-official fan art that looks like what Sugimori would have drawn with them. So you are getting communities that start building up around this sort of thing. There's also, of course, once the Giga Leak came out and it found out that people were, and people found out where it came from, somebody broke into Nintendo's servers, there was also this large ethical question. A lot of people said, well, we shouldn't talk about this sort of stuff because it's stolen material. And I can totally see that argument. I can totally see why people say we shouldn't look into it. But as a historian, I kind of feel like early designs and developmental material, I know in a very practical legal sense they belong to who created them, but I think in a moral sense they really should belong to all of us because they give us a larger sense of our own history to some degree. Like this beta Pokemon designs from Gen 1 are not just the creators, they're all of us who played them as kids and wondered how they got to this stuff. So to me, looking at this development stuff gives us these really important insights that I think should be kind of available to as wide a people as possible, because it teaches us more about these kind of things that we grew up with.
Do you think there's like also like a fascination to it too? Like just like, wow, look at what we could have had.
Yeah,
in a weird way as well. Like I know there's like, the tigers, Kaitora, Raitora, they're like mascots of like this whole beta stuff now. And it is kind of fascinating how people have latched on to like, you know, that could, look at what could have been.
Yeah.
And how like close they've gotten twice at this point. Being in there. You know, like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you continue.
No, like, it's just like that sort of like weird fascination, because like for me, like the appeal for Pokemon always for me, going back to as a kid, was what am I going to find next? What's going to be in there? What's it going to look like? Is it going to be a good typing? Can I use it? You know, like, and when those leaks first came out, it was like kid in a candy store. This is, and this is, oh my goodness, this is what it could have been. We could have had a fire water type as early as Gen 2. You know, something as silly as that sounds, you know. Oh, what were like some of the cut steel types or dark types that were there? Or now it makes sense why Bellossom made it, but Victory Bell didn't, because my God, that design is ugly. Or what, you know, what, I'm sorry, Victory Bell, but you know, it's like all those like things in my head, like they did this, but they didn't do that. Why? You know, like now it's starting to make sense.
It teaches us a lot about like. We love these characters because Sugimori and Nishida and Morimoto and Fujiwara created these. A lot of them are silly. Like Executor is a very silly kind of dumb design, but like in a lot of ways, that's what gives it personality. And I think that they created these really magical things that like people like you or me are interested in 20 years later, and to know more about them, to know more about like why Executor looks the way it does, or why Girafarig is a palindrome but its body isn't a palindrome. Like, why does Remoraid evolve into an octopus? To have answers to all those things, I think just helps us appreciate and love those designs more, and like it reminds us about how much thought and how much love was put into these.
Is there any design that you've seen from the Gold Silver Index, like whether it's like the Korean Index or the Space World demo, that you would think it should have been in the main game? Yeah. And B, if something different happened, it would have been in the main game. Like it could be the same one, or it could even be a different one between them.
Ooh, that second question is really good. I'll say for the first part, I think it has to do with my own design sensibilities. But I really like the designs in Space World 97. I think I love really later Pokemon that created, like Swinub and its evolution, whatever it's called.
Piloswine.
Piloswine, yeah. Those two are some of my favorites. But honestly, I like the majority of the Space World 97 designs more than I like what some of them that were replaced with. I absolutely adore the Ditto evolution that they bizarrely had in there that looks like it's screaming. And I know why it didn't get to the final game. Like, what is a Ditto evolution going to do? I think maybe they were planning on the Ditto evolution transforming but keeping its steel type as it switched, so that whatever it transformed into would have this good defensive typing. But even so, I'm not sure they can make that work. I love the two ghost Pokemon that are in the Space World 97. The Norawara and Kyonpen.
Yes, yeah, the Voodoo
Norawara
is
Norawara is a voodoo doll, and that's actually where the move Curse comes from. How the animation of Curse in the main game is a nail being pushed into someone. It was supposed to be Norawara's signature move, and Kyonpen is this panda that is designed around the Chinese myth of the Chinese hopping zombie that would hop all the way back to its grave. Those two are great Pokemon. They're super interesting, and they get replaced by Misdreavus, which is okay. But also Misdreavus is only found at night in the final dungeon and pretty useless throughout the game. Why create a new design like that and then stick it at the very end in the last 10 minutes of gameplay?
And I want to just say for the record, as a kid, I did add Misdreavus to my team at the end, so I just gotta point it out.
Good. And in Gen 4, I used Misdreavus a ton. Like, I loved Misdreavus in Gen 4.
Oh, good.
But Norawara and Kyonpen are great Pokemon, and we needed more ghost Pokemon, and to lose them was a complete shame. As to things that could have gone differently, give me a second to think about that one.
Well,
because that's really fascinating to me.
Well, you do, if you want, like, just to round it out a bit, like the werewolf, or like the, you know, like that one with like the pelt and the beady eyes.
I love him.
That one I wish was in the game, and I would still pay money just to put him in the game somehow. Because that design to me looks great.
It's a great design. Some people have suggested that it implies that it like ate a different Pokemon or something, and that was too dark. But like
I could see that as like a real Ice Dark type or an Ice Ghost type of some kind. So.
My pet theory is that the werewolf, eventually when I get to it in the Cryptodex, is that the two werewolves were created as mirrors to the Houndoom and Houndour line, and that we had a dark fire there and we had an ice type on the other side to
so they'd be like a dark ice or something, or just
it was ice in Space World, but maybe it would have been dark ice later. I'm not sure, but I think it gets taken out just because you don't need both it and the Houndour line, unfortunately. I think the ones that we had the greatest chance of getting were the far-fetched evolution, Madame, which is a great, interesting design. I really like it. And that one seems to have existed up until very close to the end of development, and eventually got replaced with, who did it get replaced with? Oh, it got replaced with Wooper.
Really?
Which, yeah. And I think that makes sense. They decided that they'd rather have a Quagsire be a double evolution, and be a little bit more, flexible, usable throughout the game, than just have an evolution for a very obscure Pokemon from Gen 1. But it looks like we almost got Madame, and that would have been cool. I also think we almost got that Weepinbell alternate evolution that looks very strange. That one looks like it went through 3 different like sprite designs before it was finally gotten rid of, just about 4 or 5 months before the end of development. Pincer's evolution also looks like it almost made it to the end. What happened though, so Pincer's is interesting. We've got Scyther, and Scyther evolves into Scizor. We've got Pincer, so like Pincers, that evolves into Plucks, and the idea was like Pluckers, to go along with the fact that Scizor is based upon scissors.
Yeah.
I think what happened is that originally Scizor, Plucks, and Heracross were supposed to be a triad of steel bug types that had slightly different stats. And I think they eventually just decided that Heracross was a more interesting design than Plucks and got rid of one of the 3.
Oh, so they cut Plucks because Heracross just basically took its place.
They had all 3 of them at one point, and it looks like what they were trying to do is, I'd have to go back and like look at it in detail. If memory serves, it looks like what they were trying to do is have a steel bug Scizor that excelled in speed, a steel bug in Plucks that excelled in defense, and in attack for Plucks, and then a steel bug Heracross that excelled in defense. Okay. So it looked like they were going to have a triad of similar steel bugs there. But I think you barely need 2 steel bugs, much less 3. So like,
is that why they may have changed Heracross to bug fighting, and then they just cut Plucks altogether?
Yeah. Or actually, you're right. Heracross is bug fighting, but they were always designed as like a set of 3 originally. Okay. And then they got rid of one of them, and I think Plucks makes the most sense since it was the weakest design of the 3.
Would that be your choice for like what could have been, or?
I think the most likely to me, that the one that we almost got would have been any of those 3, but especially Madame or whatever the Weepinbell evolution is supposed to be. I think those 3 nearly make it. Let's see. Also, Celebi has a really weird early design that almost makes it. And
is that the potato-looking one, like where it's like?
Yeah, it's like a weird potato that's like seeing things. It has like bulging eyes, like it doesn't know what it's doing. Larvitar and Pupitar look like they were last-minute additions as well, and looks like they almost did not make it in. Tyranitar looks a little bit earlier than that, but you can tell that they're barely used because, again, they show up just in that late-game dungeon, and it looks like they were just dropped into the late-game dungeon because they didn't have time to playtest them anywhere else, but they had invented them right at the end of the development cycle.
Wow. Like, even like the placement of the Pokemon in the game can give us like clues to like how like to the wire they got, I guess.
Likewise with Misdreavus. It looks like they were planning on getting rid of Norawara for a while, but Misdreavus even has Norawara's name for a couple of builds.
Okay.
And it looks like they weren't sure exactly how Misdreavus would act as a Pokemon for a while, so I think they just scooted it to the very end of the game so that it wouldn't mess up design if they tweaked its stats or its move pool too much.
Do you think Game Freak or anybody at Pokemon, and this is like probably the most ultimate hypothetical, and this is sort of the fanboy in me asking this a little bit, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you think they see like the conversations or the talk about like all this design stuff, and do you think they're like, you know what, maybe we should revisit a few of these? You know, like people are really like responding to like the design process, and maybe we can recreate or redo it again in a new form. You know, like you were talking about Madame, for example, the Farfetch'd evolution, and we actually got one with Surfetch'd finally, and like it's an alternate form. There's like different ways they can like release all these in there now. We have upcoming like another Scyther form for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason.
Like, and you know, we got like, and you know, there's just like all these like crazy weird ideas that they seem to be experimenting with the alternate forms and just like redoing old designs and just re-bringing them back, you know, like the Lickitung one, for example, or the Licky one that came to Gen 4 out of nowhere, or Leafeon.
That one was so much worse than the original Space World 97 one.
Oh yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I would love if they did that. I think there are a lot of designs here that are cool, and it would be great to see again. I don't think it's going to happen, and I think there's a couple of reasons why we would think that. First of all, like, I know that you have probably, as a trained historian, have written a lot of things. I think you probably find your drafts to some degree embarrassing. I think we all do as writers. And like, and even if they're not, I think that Pokemon designers, like anybody else, are going to look back at these as somewhat embarrassing, as things that they didn't quite work on enough, or things that they got rid of for a reason. Like, there's the mythologically lost Gorochu, Pikachu's third form, and they've talked a couple times about it and what it looked like, but in the end they say they cut it for good reasons that they needed for balance reasons in the game. And I think what tends to happen with these is that if they ever think of bringing them back, they get rid of them because they haven't resolved the same problems they had originally. Yeah. So Kotora and Raitora get brought back into Space World 97 after being cut from Gen 1, and they're adorable, but I think they ran into the exact same problem. Why are these in here when they compete so directly with Pikachu and other electric types? Like, what interesting niche do they serve? And I think they get cut because they haven't brought anything new to the table from the last time that they got cut. So I think as a result, Sugimori and Nishida and Morimoto and Fujiwara probably look back at these and think to themselves that there was a good reason why they got rid of them in the first place, and are probably not that interested in revisiting them. Saying that, a lot of people look at these Korean Index Mon and find ones that they think were remade into other ones. Yeah. So for instance, ID 304 is a little fox Pokemon that a lot of people turn into Fennekin. There's one that looks very similar to Cherim from Gen 5. And then there's one, I'm pretty skeptical of how much they went back to these designs. I think for the most part, they probably didn't. But I think there are some examples in which it's obvious they did. So Gen 3 has Huntail. Huntail looks more or less like a revised version of Grotesque, which was one of the Space World 97 Pokemon.
Yeah.
It looks pretty much impossible to argue with, to me, that Grotesque was brought back to the next generation and turned into Huntail. Which makes me kind of sad because Grotesque is one of my favorites in Space World 97 and nobody remembers Huntail. So maybe they were right. Maybe Grotesque was a terrible idea for Space World 97 because it ended up being so unpopular in Gen 3. And maybe that's proof that they shouldn't go back to them. I think maybe the only, we're never going to hear from them about what they think about everybody talking about these leaks. I bet they're probably horrified in the same way that you or I'd be horrified if our early writings got out there and people were commenting on dumb ideas that we'd had years and years back ago on the writing process.
That is very true.
I think that they're probably embarrassed by it. And we do know, I think, that they have followed this to some degree. Where there was an interview where they were talking about Sirfetch'd, and I think somebody asked them, was Sirfetch'd based upon the old Madame design? And they said, no, there's no connection between those two designs. Sirfetch'd is entirely new. And for them to even acknowledge that, yes, we know that there was an old design for a far-fetched evolution, and this is not it, for them to even acknowledge it seems like more than we should have gotten. Maybe the only exception to that is Kotora and Raitora are so popular. I would be very surprised, but I wouldn't see it to be completely impossible if we had some acknowledgement of Kotora and Raitora in some future game, in some form, or at least in an interview by Nishida, talking about them and talking about what she likes about them. I mean, how, was it Taco Bell? Some weird,
Taco
like,
Bell.
fast food Twitter even tweeted about KOTOR at one point.
It's probably
like,
Wendy's, because that sounds like a Wendy's thing.
Yeah, something. But, like, if Taco Bell or Wendy's can tweet about KOTOR, then these things have made it into the mainstream probably more than half the Gen 8 Pokemon. If you
It's a
think
shame,
about
because I
it.
like the
That's
Gen 8
weird.
Pokemon a lot, actually. I think they have some pretty good designs.
I like some of them. I'm very much kind of an earlier generation fan, but I really love in Gen 8 the fossil Pokemon where they put the wrong pieces onto them. That's probably the best idea they've had in Pokemon in like a decade.
One of my personal favorites in Gen 8 is Phalanx, just for the sheer audacity of like creating like Roman soldier Pokemon. You know,
I love that one too. That one's good as well.
Yeah, that I just love it. I wish it was bug fighting because it seems like a bug fighting to me.
It should be bug fighting. What is it? Is it just fighting?
It's just pure fighting.
Okay.
Which is fine. I'm fine with it. I love using it. I'm sorry. I'm just rambling now.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I guess like just one more real quick question. Are there, and this is one I should have asked before, like, has there been any problems you've been running into with the entire project, with like finding the information, with like putting this all together? I know you've said like how your hypothesis on the Korean Dex being the order, like there's like Stantler, for example, who is not necessarily fitting into that for all that, but are there any other problems that are arising as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's a huge problem, but in recent years, we've uncovered a lot of interviews with the creators at this time, and they're not kept in any one place. So you kind of have to have an eidetic memory to remember where each interview came from. To be fair, a lot of people who are really into Pokemon development have memories way better than mine and can point out the one time one person said this in May 15th of 1998 or whatever.
Sugimori was at a conference or something in Japan, and he said this, and it was on record, you know, and it was in the Nintendo Power or something like that.
And I've also heard that there are some untranslated interviews that are more clear about some of the Sugimori and Fujiwara designs in Gen 2 that we don't have, but I'm not sure about those for sure. I would say in general, though, the big problem is that I'm creating a puzzle that we just literally don't have the pieces for. In Gen 1, Helix Chamber has shown, well, there are some things that they're missing from Gen 1 design. They're missing, most importantly, the front sprites of all the deleted Pokemon, so we have to guess at what they looked like. But besides the front sprites, Helix Chamber has early move sets for a lot of these Pokemon. It is early encounter data for where you find them. And the index, the internal index they have, is a lot more straightforward when it comes to understanding chronological order of development than the Green index is.
Yeah.
So in general, I think Gen 1 is in many ways the holy grail if we got more information about it. But on the other hand, I think that Gen 1, we have all the information that we can put together a reasonably accurate puzzle. I don't think we quite have that with Gen 2. I think we have a ton of information. Cutting Room Floor and everybody who works on it, Cutting Room Floor, is really, really good at finding any information and citing it and organizing it in a way that makes sense. But I just think we don't quite have all the information. There's a couple of builds out there that would be super helpful and would tell us for sure if a lot of the speculation I'm using to come up with these theories are actually right or actually just speculation. And I feel a lot less certain about my speculation than I would about Gen 1, simply because the information that we have is not conclusive in the way it is in Gen 1. So that's what I'd say. I think we've gotten way more than we ever should have from both Gen 1 and Gen 2. I would absolutely kill for the pre-Space World 97 build. I think also there's probably a mid-1998 build that probably looks very similar to Space World 97, but I think would confirm a lot of the theories I have if I could just see a couple of the differences. And we'll never get those. But that, to sum up one more time, that's the main problem. We don't quite have all the pieces of the puzzle for Gen 2.
With what we have, though, one thing I guess, like, how would your, like, I don't know how old you are, but like, how would your, like, younger self, when you first play Gold and Silver, react to, like, just looking at all this? Like, would it be like at awe? Would it be like anger? Like, I don't even know. Like,
yeah. Well, Gen 2 is a weird one for me because I was just old enough that by the time Gen 2 had come out, Pokemon craze had faded for me. So I played Gen 1. I was the first person at my elementary school to get 150 Pokemon.
Nice,
I'll always be proud of that. I traded a Magmar for an Electabuzz, and the two of us got the whole 150. But I never actually played Gen 2 as a kid. The next one I played was Gen 4, and then I went back to Gen 2 many years later. Wow. So I can't really say what my younger self would say about Gen 2. Well, let me take that back. Remoraid and Girafarig never made any sense to me as a kid, unknown as well. I was fascinated by those Pokemon because it felt like there was something to them that just wasn't there. There was some interesting piece to them that didn't quite make sense. And for me to be able to now go back and now explain to my younger self that, like, the reason Girafarig is a palindrome is because its back was supposed to be an evil giraffe, and the reason Remoraid evolves into an octopus is that it was supposed to be a gun and Octillery was supposed to be a tank. Those sorts of things, for me, are the coolest thing you could possibly imagine. Those things, I think, are just a joy to imagine understanding as a kid. And in general, that's what I really like about not just Pokemon, but all sorts of games' developmental history. I always find that when there's a stupid thing that doesn't make any sense in the final game, if you go back just a couple of months into the development history, it makes perfect sense. And it, all of a sudden, the reasons they did that make sense, but you didn't have that past. So for instance, in the Giga Leak, we got some Super Mario World assets. Why do baby Yoshis look nothing like adult Yoshis? I had wondered that since I was a young kid. Like, their noses look completely different. Turns out that in an earlier build of Super Mario World, adult Yoshi had an ugly nose like that looked identical to the baby Yoshi's one. And they changed it because it looked bad on the adult Yoshi, but never changed it on the baby. So like, even things like that never made sense to you as a kid, if you just go a couple months back in development and look at old assets, all of a sudden the designers didn't make those choices because they were weird, because they didn't have any reason. The designers made those choices for rational reasons that you can't see because the final version doesn't have their thought processes. If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. It's literally like what the process of actual designing is. You know,
Yeah.
I think your analogy before about like our first drafts of like back in the day versus what they are more refined, more ready for the public now, you know, a lot of that does make sense in any form of art or any form of work that you do put in, whether you're painting a picture, whether you're writing a book, or whether you're designing a game. You know, it's a perfect way to kind of end it, I guess. It's a little bit after 3. I apologize for keeping you for so long. Any final thoughts, any final things you want to say, any shout outs you want to give? You shouted out Cutting Room Floor, Dr. Lava, and all them.
So I would say that there's a community of really brilliant people around these things. Orange French knows his stuff and is great at writing those Cutting Room Floor articles. Dr. Lava is great for the way he popularizes these things. Racy Beep's art is great, and she does really good work, and she is she's a very positive part of that entire community. I think in general, a lot of the people who work at Cutting Room, who do things on Cutting Room Floor, they're all hobbyists. They're all doing it for fun, but they are very good at what they do. And we couldn't know any of this stuff without the work that they put in on their off time to catalog all of this data and all of this interesting stuff.
I've used Cutting Room Floor as well, but I did like a whole like chronological history of Ocarina of Time's development.
Cool, yeah. They have a great article on Ocarina of Time.
Oh, it is fascinating, like just to go through like the little bits and bobs on that one. And even like I'm not like technically adept at all, so like when they're like going through, all right, we got like 4 or 5 different builds. Here's how like we break it down, like we have like the A-B cycle, the C&D cycle, whatever it is, and you know, you can tell based off of the graphics and based off of the screenshot, it's that sort of like just the way they like communicate it, bringing it down to like terms like that. I'm trying to think of some of their.
I was just going to mention some of their other good articles if you haven't checked them out. GoldenEye's one is really good because the developers on GoldenEye are, unlike the developers on Pokemon, they're very forthright on like the development process. You get a lot of cool insights there. The Super Mario World pre-release stuff, we have a ton from the Giga Leak, and it's all super fascinating. And the Super Mario World 2, the Yoshi's Island stuff, we have this build of a completely different game called Super Donkey that eventually became it. And we have some early builds of that game that are just fascinating. It turns out Yoshi wasn't originally delivering Mario. He was originally delivering a wizard in a blue robe. And when he transforms into like helicopters and cars in that game, originally it was the baby wizard using his magic wand to turn Yoshi into those things.
Oh my god.
So like cool stuff like that. And then finally, I think it's Mega Man X3, maybe it's Mega Man X2. One of the two of them has some really cool pre-release stuff with completely different sprites for some of the bosses that I never thought I'd be able to see. So they have great articles there.
Yeah, definitely. So everybody who, well, no one's going to be listening to this, but like, you know, I'll make sure to write it in to check out the Cutting Room. And like all, you know, I've used them a lot. Dr. Lava, I've actually interviewed previously about his work on Pokemon as well. yeah, everybody. Racy Beep, am I saying that right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Like, I've seen her art all over the place as well, and it is amazing. Like, honestly, you put that up next to like the old school Sugimori watercolors. I don't know if you can tell the difference.
No,
and
I don't think
like
so.
that's how good she was, or she is, at doing that, I should say.
Yeah.
Outside of that, anything else you want to say?
No, I think I'm good. I think we've thoroughly covered this topic, and I appreciate it. Thanks for talking to me.
First off, thank you for actually, Nick, being on here and like just meeting me and talking about it. This has been fun.
I thought so too. I did this to talk about these things, so I'm glad that you wanted to talk about them.
No, and now we got a record of it. I'm definitely gonna enjoy writing out the article. And thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your knowledge and enjoying the conversation. It's
very happy to. Please let me know when the article is out so I can link it and look it over. That sounds good.
I plan to. And
cool.
Any mistakes, let me know as well. I'll change them as quick as I can.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
And I hope you have a good day.
You too.